Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's weekly Texas Counts update. We just opened up the webinar, so folks are slowly but surely trickling into the webinar. So we'll give it about another minute or two, and then we will get started. But thank you so much again for joining us today, and we will get started shortly. Okay, folks, we are going to go ahead and get started. Again, welcome to this week's weekly Texas Counts update. We are happy Monday. It's April 20th. I believe this is either our 6th or 7th Texas Counts update. So thank you for joining us again. As a reminder, we have Dr. Lila Valencia from the Texas Demographic Center, Ms. Genesis Sanchez from the Leo Educational Fund, and then I'm Katie Martin Lightfoot, and I work for the Center for Public Policy Priorities. Today's agenda, which looks very similar to what we typically cover throughout these sessions, is of course welcome everyone, and next we will have Genesis kind of walk us through the 2020 census updates. I'm sure all of you are aware about some new operational changes and proposals by the Census Bureau, so we'll make sure to cover those for y'all. Next, we will have Lila look at the data and kind of see where we are in self-response. And then after that, I do have a little bit of a typo there, but we will talk about outreach, and we'll actually do some polling as well. And then of course, we will save time at the end for any questions that you might have. At any point in time, please feel free to pop your questions into the chat box or the Q&A function. We are here to answer any and all questions for you. And again, thank you so much for joining us today, and I will pass it off to Genesis to get us started.
Hi, everybody. Happy Monday. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. I'm going to be reviewing kind of what the news looked like last week, as well as some of the things that we're keeping our eyes on. Please feel free to throw any questions into the chat. Katie, if we can go on to the next slide, please. So last week, as many of you know, the Census Bureau requested statutory relief from Congress of an additional 120 calendar days. What this means is that they also extended self-response and field data collection from July 31st to October 31st. So that means for many of us, our work continues through the fall. The two statutory deadlines that are most key in these changes are the ones that are in regards to reporting census data. So the first is the apportionment count, which was originally supposed to be given to the White House on December 31st, 2020. That has now been requested to be changed to April 30th, 2021. And then the second is the redistricting data files that go to the states. And that has been requested from a move from April 1st, 2021 to July 31st, 2021. So I'm sure for many of you, this news raised a lot of questions specifically about redistricting and what the impact would have here on Texas. We still don't really know in terms of what kind of actions we need to take right now, but I do want to share some of the other kind of concerns we have going forward. So I also want to share that our understanding of these changes is that the adjustments were made by career census employees. So this is not, as we know it, a political maneuver. And it's going to be really important that we keep the same thread. One reason is because what we've seen, and research shows it, anecdotally we know it, is that the more you politicize the census, the more people move away. They do not like hearing any kind of political maneuvering around the census. And so we kind of need to continue in the same vein. And so another thing that's really key is that these are timeline changes. So for right now, we're still kind of trying to understand how it's going to impact operations, even as there are no internal operational changes as of yet. And so for now, keep this in your back pocket as we kind of move forward. Can we go to the next slide? So before I kind of talk about what we want to think about moving forward, I also want to review non-response follow-up. So if you guys have trained with me, then you know that I've covered this, but just to get us all kind of on the same basis. So non-response follow-up, or NRFU, is the set of processes that answers the question, what happens if someone doesn't self-respond? And so originally it was from May 13th to July 31st, and now it's been extended from August 11th to October 31st. The Census Bureau, going into the 2020 census, estimated that about 39% of the count would have to go into NRFU. That's a really large percentage, right? We're talking about how do you reach people who do not self-respond, those hardest to count populations. So in NRFU, there are three elements. The first is what we think of when we think of the census. We think of census takers who go to doors that haven't responded. And so in doing this process, a census taker will generally make up to 6 attempts to reach a household. If they can't reach a household for any reason, they will go to a proxy. So a proxy is someone who can be a neighbor, a landlord, a real estate agent, or some other knowledgeable person. And so they'll go to them and say, hey, do you know who lives here at XYZ address? The last resort is the use of administrative records. So the Census Bureau can use administrative records to enumerate non-responding households where they say quality data is available. So they grab this information from Social Security, Medicare and Medicaid, the IRS. And as you guys can imagine, this is a big concern to us. We don't really support an extensive use of administrative records because the best data that you could possibly get comes from self-response. In addition, people move, circumstances change. So that quality data, it's hard to gauge how good the quality of that data is when you use administrative records. And so I'm mentioning this because going forward, one of the big questions that we're gonna have is, what is NRFU gonna look like? There are a lot of changes that have to be made, but so far, as I mentioned, only the timeline has shifted. And so our stance on this as NALEO is that in order to have a successful census, you have to have a very robust NRFU, and the Census Bureau has to make every best effort to reach our hardest to count communities. So they can't take any shortcuts during this process. And so our hope is that Congress will step in and have more oversight to ensure the quality of NRFU. Next slide, please, Katie. So other things that we're considering, and I'm sure that are on your minds as well, is that this change in timelines impacts a lot of other internal processes, as well as kind of the census at large. So we're kind of keeping our eye on what this is going to mean for state redistricting timelines, how group quarter enumeration and special populations will continue to be counted, and ensuring that they are reached as well as possible. There are other considerations around COVID-19. So we're thinking about continued delays and different shelter-in-place orders across the country. If there are continued delays, it has looked differently across the country. We're thinking about recall bias. So we're not too worried about that in this census, simply because we started to hunker down around April 1st. And so people are likely to remember where they are. But as you can imagine, if you're getting enumerated in October, April 1st isn't really top of mind. We're also thinking about update leave and update enumerate, both stateside and in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico, for example, is counted through update leave. The entirety of the island is counted in that way. And so one of the things about that is that, as you can imagine, if we don't get a good count of Puerto Rico, then we don't get a good count of Latino populations in the United States. So it's going to be really, really important that the Bureau go back into Puerto Rico and have a robust plan around the island, especially because as of right now, they still haven't given us a date on when they're going to be doing that. Other things is that doing NERFU during summer and fall is going to be really tough in Texas. As you guys can imagine, the heat in Texas is, we all know it, right? We all feel it. But things like tornado season, hurricane season, we are also keeping an eye on hiring a quality workforce. So hiring has always been, many of you know, have heard it firsthand that hiring with the Bureau has been kind of difficult. And so how they're going to proceed now, how they're going to get people onboarded and trained, and that they hire people who are culturally competent and have the language skills necessary to reach our hardest to count communities. And one thing that many of you may also have in the back of your mind, because we do work across different spaces, is what will GOTC look like during GOTV, right? Coming up into November. And so those are all different things that we're going to be thinking about. And above all, how are these things in combination going to impact the fairness and the count of historically undercounted communities? And so our intention in sharing this is not to necessarily be an alarmist, but rather to also give you guys some of the things that we're thinking about as well, so that as you're seeing it in your own networks and communities, as well as in your own outreach, to also, let us know if there's something that is going on or that you're curious about, or, you're concerned about. Please let us know, because we do work closely with the Census Bureau. We have a lot of historical knowledge around these processes. And so we want to make sure that we are an advocate and that we're reporting back to the Bureau as well as internally to a lot of the national stakeholders. Many times when I hear something on these calls, I'm able to take it back to my team and hear from other people across the country, and also raise flags if need be. And so that's also another reason that we want to make sure to share this information. Next slide, Katie. And then lastly, so the last mailings are delayed. The fourth mailing was originally supposed to go out between April 18th and the 16th, I believe. And that has been extended through April 30th. So as a reminder, the fourth mailing is both a reminder and a paper questionnaire. So if folks haven't self-responded or wanted to do it via paper, they would have to wait for this mailing. So if you do have community members who have expressed that and they're asking, hey, I haven't gotten it, what should I do? Just let them know, hang tight until April 30th. And then the last reminder, the fifth mailing, will go out between April 27th and May 9th. And so I also want to just take the time, if there's any materials or training that would be helpful for you moving forward. I know that we come together on these calls as a combination of both Dr. Valencia and Katie's and mine are like extended networks. And so if there's a training that you want to do, that you want to see, that you think would be helpful in your region, please feel free to throw it in the chat box. I'm happy to, chat more about it and kind of get a gauge of what we can offer folks and try to do virtually in the next few weeks. And with that, I think I'm done. Katie, there's a few questions.
Yeah, I would say some of these questions are directly related to operational changes. So I wonder if we could cover those right now, Genesis.
Sure. So Berta, I didn't hear about a vote. Berta asked to clarify, Congress did approve the delay in data delivery. I didn't hear about a vote. So our understanding is it has not been approved. Dr. Valencia, I don't know if you want to pop in. I think you're right, Berta, it still has to go to a vote. Crystal asked, is the slides will be shared after the meeting? Yes, all our slides are recorded and shared after the meeting. So if we're moving a little fast, we'll make sure to get those to you. So yes, Berta asked, I had understood that the Bureau did not need statutory relief for the extension to October 31st, but they did need congressional approval for the delay of apportionment and redistricting data. Yes, Berta, that is exactly right. I hope I didn't misspeak earlier. Katie asked, any word on whether or not the census will send additional mail reminders? So for now, we understand that they're going to continue with the 4th and 5th mailings. I did hear rumblings of another mailing after that, but I'm not completely sure. There was a question as to whether the extension to October 31st would stay in place if Congress did not approve delay in delivering apportionment and redistricting data, but I'm not really sure about that. I would have to check. And then Sylvia Garza asked, with many of the rural areas in Cameron County, Texas, they still have not received surveys or reminders. What is the census doing to reach these areas if we are still in shelter-in-place ordinance? So in Cameron County, there is a large update leave population. So what that means is that the Bureau sends out enumerators into the field to go to these addresses, update the address, and leave material. And so this is why many of those rural areas, not only in Cameron County, but across the state, have also not received materials. Originally, the Bureau told us, just wait, let us do our work, and then people can start responding. But if you do have contact with these communities in any way, people can still self-respond without getting census materials. They can still go online and they can still call. And so please encourage those in these areas to continue to self-respond, even if they haven't received something. And then Elena asked, you may have answered this, but I might have missed it. If Congress doesn't approve the delay, will these deadlines still be extended? I'm not totally sure about that. We still need to get some clarity on that, but I will get those questions answered for you all.
Yeah, and Genesis, this is Lila. I guess the only thing that I would add is that the Census Bureau can make operational changes, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is absolutely permissible. Now, the thing that needs congressional approval is the movement of those apportionment and redistricting dates that are constitutional mandates. If they were to find that their work delays or operational delays were to start affecting those, and I think that that's exactly what they're communicating to Congress, is that these requested delays will directly impact the quality of data available at that point in time. And that's why they're requesting the approval to move those dates. Now, if this would be, I think, worst case scenario, if Congress were to not approve the movement of those dates, but the Census Bureau still felt it was necessary to make those delays in operations, then what we may end up with is poorer and poorer quality of data and an increased use of administrative records, which could have really far-reaching effects, right? So I think right now the most important thing is, to definitely keep an eye on, when this congressional vote will take place, to keep in mind that the Census Bureau, as Genesis mentioned, Census Bureau career professionals are making this request, right? They feel this is really necessary in order to get a complete and accurate count. And then really just try to jumpstart our self-response, because that is going to be the best antidote to this entire situation.
Thank you, Dr. Valencia. I'm going to head over to the Q&A. Thank you for clarifying that. And I will say as well, to add to that, as of now, our continued goal is to continue to push self-response. As I mentioned earlier, self-response continues to be the way that we get the best available data from households. When you self-respond, you are more likely to give the best information. You're not fibbing, you're not excluding people. And so this is why we don't want to resort to administrative data, because the quality is not there. To answer some of the other questions in the question and answer box, so Maria asked, is there a way to receive a list of the addresses of non-self-responders? Unfortunately, no. The Bureau has what they call a universe of addresses, but we can only, what we gauge based on maps like the CUNY map, Rome, is self-respond rates in an area or a tract. And so you might want to look at the tracts in your school district and see kind of where people are not responding, and then that way target. But as for direct addresses, that would be really I don't think that's possible at all. And then on the more to consider, will higher education institutions be enumerating their new students or just the students that were enrolled in April? This is a question we're not sure of. This is a really good question, and we're going to have to, another thing to consider is how students will continue to be counted. As everybody on the call can attest to, counting students has been really hard during the census, and so we'll make sure to ask these questions as well. How do we address a 2-month gap between last reminders and the beginning of NERFU operations? Also a really great question. I think it's going to end up, we're going to be doing a lot of work during this time, kind of to remind people that there's still an opportunity to respond. I know that that may cause a little bit of anxiety in thinking about how much we have to do. In addition, right, a lot of us were looking at the, at August as kind of our end date. So this might mean that we need to keep the momentum up, and just know that Katie and Dr. Valencia and I are in conversation about how we can do that. Do we have any actual videos specifically talking about the virus and the proposed new dates of mailouts? We don't. I don't think the Census Bureau does anything like that as well, but I'm sure a lot of the National Census Campaign and coalitions will start to create material once the vote happens and once these changes are set in stone or more set in stone. And so we'll definitely send those out as we get them. Maria Camacho asks, are there plans to send door-to-door enumerators in the upcoming months? Yes. So as I mentioned, the operations are still kind of the same. The enumerators are still planning on sending them out, but that's going to change. I don't have the dates on me right now, but they do have some of those proposed dates already, and so we can send out the additional dates that they published recently. Any ideas on the timeline for when these changes may be approved by Congress? I'm not totally sure. I don't know if you know, Dr. Valencia. And then,
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Any ideas on a timeline for when these changes may be approved by Congress?
No clue.
Yeah, and then Willie asks,
and I do have the dates for NERFU. If that's the enumerators in the coming months question. Are those the dates you said you didn't have, Genesis, or are those the update?
Yeah.
So for NERFU. So for NERFU, it's August 11th to October 31st. And then for update leave, June 13th through July 9th.
Thank you, Dr. Valencia. So we'll also send the published list of dates and timelines so everybody can have that handy. And then Willie asked, can churches fill out the forms for elderly members who are not literate in English or Spanish? I was asked this Saturday. As of right now, no, we can't help people. We can't directly assist with filling out forms for folks. What you can do is point them to either the English or Spanish phone line. I know this is a kind of an imperfect answer, but we're happy to send over more guidance as well on this. And John Kilburn asked, I placed a solicitation for a South Texas survey. Can some of the folks here contact me? I'll throw the email into the chat box as well so that we can get some assistance in sharing this. And so if you're located in South Texas, please take a look at that. And then I think that might be it for now. We're going to continue to answer questions, but please continue to pop them into the respective boxes and we'll kind of come back to them. But for now, I'm going to hand this over to Dr. Valencia.
Thanks, Genesis. So I'll just add really quickly, I know the Census Bureau has 2 new videos out, really making a strong connection between the importance of responding to the census and the COVID situation and circumstances that we're facing right now. So we can definitely share those 2 videos. I also know that there's communications right now going on within the Census Bureau about additional sort of shifts in communications and paid media that they can make given this new timeline and these new circumstances. We don't quite know exactly where, when those will be available or what kinds of shifts they'll be making. But as soon as we have word of any additional materials, we'll definitely share those with you. But I'm going to go ahead, as we've been talking about, just how important self-response data are, I'm going to go ahead and share where we are currently. If we can go to the next slide, please. So again, I'm just going to be sharing the 3 resources that we've been relying on during this time to really monitor self-response. So the Census Bureau has a self-response map that you can access the different geographies and see self-response for those areas. Then there's the CUNY Hard to Count map that really allows you to drill into those areas where you're seeing high response, low response, and really understand the characteristics of the people that live in the area. These, of course, are historical data, but they help us to understand who we would need to reach out to in these areas if we wanted to increase self-response. And then the last one is a link to the Census Bureau's rankings of self-response. It's a real easy snapshot kind of tool where you can just go really quickly and see how your area is doing compared to other places in the country. Next slide, please. So I'll start with where we are today. Texas has now had at least 46% of households respond to the 2020 census. This, of course, is below the national average, which has now reached that 50% threshold. You can get the rankings to the rankings by double clicking on that rankings here at the top of the map. And then of course you can share or embed these maps at different geographies using the little share icon. But of course, Minnesota is leading the nation in terms of self-response. And then Texas still remains at 40th. We have over 5.6 million households in Texas that have responded. Next slide, please. So here we can see the map of Texas at the county level. And any of you who have heard me or Lloyd Potter present at different meetings or events, you probably have heard us talk about the population triangle in the state of Texas. And of course, that's anchored at the points by the main urban areas in the state. So Dallas, Fort Worth at the top, the Harris County where Houston is over in the east, and then over to the west with San Antonio and Austin. And so it is those areas of the state that have the highest response rate right now. But really most importantly it's the suburban areas of that population triangle that are really the highest self-responding areas in the state, with the addition of Randall County, that's right to the south of Amarillo in the Panhandle. Next slide, please. So here is our daily response, as well as our self-response, and as well as our daily increase in response. Both of these are percentages, right? The overall response rate is the larger percent, and then the individual percentage daily increases are mapped by the bars. And what you see is that the average daily increase overall for the state of Texas is 1.2 percentage points. But when we look at the pre-census day average, we had about a 1.9 daily increase for the state of Texas. The US was still outperforming Texas in terms of daily increases for most days, except for Census Day, where we actually had a higher increase than the nation overall. Our Census Day increase was 3.1 percentage points, and then also the 30th of March. But since then, we've had some days where our response daily increase has been higher than the nation's, but for both the nation and Texas, our daily response has really significantly dropped since Census Day. It's dropped by more than half in the state of Texas. And so it's really critical that we really jumpstart these self-responses. And I really do believe that part of the request from the Census Bureau to delay some of these operations are directly related to these really low daily increases in self-response. As you can see, this is not a thing that only Texas is experiencing, but given the fact that our self-response is already lower than the nation, we really have to do a lot to get those daily increases up. Next slide, please. So here's that dashboard that I was talking to you about, and you can see the rankings by state. You can see the approximate number of households that have responded per state. You can see how that compares to the nation. And I'd like to say Texas has done really well, in at least relative to its neighbors. We have a higher response rate than New Mexico. We have a higher response rate than Oklahoma, but we still have a lower response rate than the state of Louisiana. So if any of you have, some friends or, connections in the state of Louisiana, and you want to get a friendly competition going with them, you can let them know that Texas is on the heels and may surpass them really soon. But this is just a fun way that you can kind of look at the rankings and sort of reach out to people that you may know and really help to kind of get some excitement around responding to the census. Next slide, please. The bottom half of this dashboard shares rankings by county and by city. If you select the state, it'll show you just for the particular state, but the default is the US view. Here I selected for Texas, and you can see that Rockwall County is leading the state at 57.7% response rate. So that's more than 10 percentage points over the state average. Fort Bend has moved up to second place, and I really think they could catch up to Rockwall because they actually have a higher daily increase in Rockwall. So we'll see if they can get to #1 by the end of this week. And then you can see the different cities. If you start to Google some of these cities, or you may just know them because they are in your area, you'll notice that a lot of these cities are suburban cities in the state, and they have the highest percentages in terms of response rates. And you can see that some of them are, have like 20–30% higher response rate than the state itself. Next slide, please. So let's look at one of the counties that's doing really well, right? This is Fort Bend County. It has a response rate of 57.2%. You can see though that there is kind of a dichotomy, right, where the northern part of the county is really responding at a higher rate than other parts of the county towards the south and the southeast. So let's go ahead and take a closer look to see what's happening in these individual census tracts, right? And you can see where you can select the different geographies. Here I'm looking at the state in Fort Bend County with the census tract view, but you can also get a city view, you can get congressional district view, but go ahead and go to the next slide, please. And we will use the CUNY hard to count map to really understand what's happening in Fort Bend County. And so I selected 3 different census tracts to help you sort of see what the tool can do for you. Here we're looking at the county view with the census tract background, but at the county level, you can see again that Fort Bend County has a 57.2% response. This compares to their 72% response in 2010. You can see that their internet response is very closely aligned with their overall total response. So the majority of people are responding by internet. On the next slide, I've selected a census tract that is in the Rosenberg area of Fort Bend County. Now, I'm not very familiar with Fort Bend, and so you guys definitely let me know if I get anything wrong, but this is an example of how you can use this information. So I've drilled down to census tract 6754.02, and by using the widgets that they provide on the left-hand side of the map, you can see the details for that census tract. One of the details that I have highlighted here is that it is a high low income population. You can see that about 17% of people that live in this census tract live below poverty, and an additional 20% live near poverty, or at about 200%. The Census Bureau provided, in all of the information that I have typed up here, I use by pulling on that drop down arrow that says low income populations, and it'll show you how the Census Bureau invited them through their contact strategy. It'll show you internet access. the risk of undercounting children under 5. And so when I looked at those different characteristics that they provide, the CUNY map provides, what I noticed about this Rosenberg County is that it was invited by internet first, initial contact, but there's about 26% of the population in the census tract that do not have an internet connection. So it's important that we try to reach out to this population in a different way, right? One of the things I noticed was that there was a high percentage of cell phone data plans. And so this could be a particular census tract that maybe would be good to reach out to through a text, text messaging campaign. But what you can also see is that it's 56% Hispanic, 10% Black. It has a high risk of young children being undercounted, 24% renters, 19% foreign born, but it has a pretty high poverty rate. So this is an area that I think is more disconnected from sort of the more densely populated parts of Fort Bend County, has a high Hispanic population with high poverty and less internet connection. And so really reaching out to them is gonna, you're gonna wanna understand those characteristics to understand how best you could reach this population. The next example that I provide is for a census tract in Arcola. If you'll go to the next slide. Yeah, so this is over on the east part of the county of Fort Bend County. They received an internet first bilingual invitation, and they also have a high percentage of cell data plan only. Now they have the highest risk of young children being undercounted. They have over 300 children. It's a very, it has a high proportion of African Americans and Hispanics. And so this is going to be an area where we really want to understand how can we help reach out to these households that have a high risk of undercounting Black and brown children, right? And so we really want to focus a campaign that encourages this census tract to really know how important it is that children of color, in particular, are counted in the 2020 census. Now I have one more example, and this is for a census tract that is in the Stafford area of Fort Bend County. So it's to the northeast of Sugar Land, and they received an internet first invitation. And so they were really encouraged to go to the internet first, and you'll see that this is likely a younger sort of area. It's much more diverse. They have 29% African American, 28% Hispanic, 20% Asians, a really high, very mobile population here with 47% of renters and the highest percentage of foreign-born population. So here, and this one also has the highest percentage of single parents of the different census tracts that I presented to you here. So these are probably young families that are starting off. They have children at home, although the population of young children is smaller here. They still have a very high risk of undercounting them. But this census tract has a higher connection to internet access. And so we really want to encourage and promote sort of messaging that reaches out to an immigrant population and how important it is to count children of immigrants in the 2020 census, and to remind them that they can respond easily online because they have a higher internet access connection. So again, all of these characteristics, I pulled them just from doing that drop down there. And so you can really zoom into a particular area where you are and really try to get an understanding of what am I looking at? Who am I looking at here? Other tools that the CUNY map has are where libraries are located or where churches are located, where other partners. Of course, that becomes a little bit different given the social distancing right now. But when you are aware of who your partners are in that area, then perhaps you can reach out to them to build more of a collaboration in trying to reach out to these particular communities. So I just wanted to give you those 3 examples to really kind of understand how you could drill down into the census tract level to understand what you're looking at in a particular area. And I think on the next slide, all I have is just a reminder of how you can share all of these tools. They have real easy share options where you can pull the information, you can pull the data, you can embed a link, you can go to your social media and share this information. And then lastly, just a reminder that on the next slide, that the Census Bureau has a census response rate challenge kit, where we really encourage you, if you are in Fort Bend, maybe you reach out to some of these neighboring pockets of the population in these neighboring cities and, create a challenge on how can we push the needle a little bit more? How can we get Fort Bend County, to top Rockwall County in terms of overall response? And then really, get playful and sort of a friendly competition, and then share that on your social media to let people know and get excited behind how their local area is doing in response to the 2020 census. And I think that's all the information that I have.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lila. One quick thing I want to share before we get into the outreach portion of today's presentation. Charlene from the Census Bureau is on the webinar today, and she just wanted to share out about Update Leave. So Update Leave is scheduled for June 14th to July 29th. Again, we're planning to follow up with more information about kind of what those new deadline or timelines are, so you're aware. But she says that the Census Bureau is asking that folks that have a 911 or a city-style address to respond by phone or online. So if you have like a traditional address like 123 Cherry Lane, great, you can self-respond during this time. But if not, if they're not sure, we're asking that they wait until they get their questionnaire. And we had a conversation, Lila and I, with the Census Bureau last week, and basically they shared if folks without a regular city-style address responded to the census, there's a chance that they might fill out that form, but then they still might have a packet left at their door. They still might have an enumerator coming to their door later on to make sure that those responses are done, meaning they can't, if there's not an address associated with the questionnaire being sent in, they can't kind of double check that. And so again, and Charlene wanted to clarify, it's June 13th through July 9th are those update leave periods. So again, if your update leave area does have a city style address, then yes, they can respond. But if not, do know if they do respond to the census, they still might have a packet left at their door or an enumerator coming as well, just because they can't double check when they're not the city style address. So if anyone does have any more questions about that, please feel free to pop them in the chat box. Again, we also, Genesis just posted the timeline and operational changes in the chat box as well, if y'all want to take a peek at those. But now let's shift gears and talk about census outreach. And so we know that there are a lot of changes happening to the census, just like there are a lot of changes happening in our own lives. But the message kind of remain the same, is that the count continues. We are still trying to count every Texan in our state. And again, that is why it is so important for us who are involved in this Get Out the Count effort to make sure that we are encouraging our communities to self-respond to the census. And so one thing that I wanted to do is poll folks. And with that, I have a couple of questions. And the reason I'm asking these is, one, would love to hear kind of what strategies are currently working in your community and how you're feeling. But this will also help prepare Texas Counts as a whole as we kind of move into our next phase of organizing and outreach for Get Out the Count efforts in Texas. So the first question, and hopefully I can do this, hopefully the poll is launched. And so my first question for everyone on the phone is, what Get Out the Count strategies are working in your community? So for example, are you providing Get Out the Count materials to essential locations, phone banking, text banking, social media posts? live events, email blasts, reaching out to local media, doing mailings, maybe participating in some community challenges or other, maybe you have some other ideas that you're participating in that we would love for you to pop in the chat box. So hopefully everybody is looking at the questions for question 1, and I'll give it a couple of seconds for folks to respond to this first question. And I think that folks might be able to see all 4 of my questions, so I'm just gonna walk us through those. In addition, would also love to hear about what concerns you have about your Get Out the Count efforts given the new October 31st deadline. And so do you have concerns about losing momentum maybe internally at your organization? Maybe you still can't dedicate resources or people power to that effort? Are you nervous about folks in your community losing momentum? I know Genesis talked a little bit about recall bias potentially not being an issue, but maybe there's some concerns in your community around that. Another point of concern could potentially be funding. I know lots of us involved in this work, we're planning on wrapping things up in July or August, and maybe funding, you weren't budgeting to do events going into October. Next, safety and well-being of our communities. And then again, if there are other concerns you have, we would love to hear them if you want to pop them into the chat box. Next one, are you concerned about the implications of the request to change the 2 statutory deadlines for reporting census data? And so as a reminder, these are the 2 requests that have been made to Congress. So the first being the apportionment count being moved from December 31st to April 30th, and then the redistricting data files being sent to states being moved from April 1st to July 31st. And then last but not least, I know we talked about this for folks who were on our call last week, but are you interested in participating in another Census Day? And the reason I put Census Day in quotes is we know that April 1st is Census Day, and yes, it's an anchor date, but it was also a day of celebration. And so at Texas Counts, we are really trying to put our heads together and think about what another day in Texas could be to celebrate the census, but also have a really strong self-response rate that day. And so if folks on the line are interested in participating in another Census Day, please let us know. We're probably going to move forward with plans, but would love to have partners joining us in this work. And I'm going to leave the poll open for a little bit, and we'll review the data towards the end. I know we're a little short on time, and I want to make sure that we still get to folks' questions. But thank you for those who have responded. And if you haven't, please continue to respond to the poll. But in terms of census outreach, I wanted to share that we are continuing to kind of monitor things that are happening at the national and state level. I know folks are kind of curious about kind of what's the secret sauce for counties like Randall who are doing pretty well in terms of self-response. And so please know that we are reaching out to those counties, and hopefully we'll be able to report back or invite them to attend one of these weekly updates so we can get a better idea of what's kind of happening on the ground and what's been really working well for them in their communities to help get out the count. But this slide is just a reminder of some pivots that you can potentially do. And of course, we now know that there are actually 3 ways to respond to the census. So of course you can respond online. I always like to put the phone number before folks as well. And then as Genesis said, we know that the paper copies started going out around mid-April, but they're actually going to continue being mailed until April 30th. And so just continuing to remind our community members that if they haven't received their paper copy and that's something they're waiting on, don't fret. They have until April 30th to get that physical paper copy in the mail. And so just reminding folks of that. And then last but not least, in terms of outreach, wanted to share out that Texas Counts is resuming our Pivoting to Digital Census Outreach and Organizing series. We took a little bit of a pause to kind of regroup to see how we could best support folks. And our next topics, and these will be happening every Thursday at 4 p.m. So this Thursday, we will be talking about Instagram. So I know we talked about Facebook in the past, but we're going to do a deeper dive into Instagram and how you can really utilize that. And so that will be this Thursday, April 23rd. Next Thursday, we'll be doing a deeper dive into live events. As we remember from last week, folks are really tuning in and streaming on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, all of the streaming. So thinking about how you can host some live events or partner with folks in your community to host live events to spread awareness about the census. And then we'll at that point in time for the following week, we'll do a little bit of a series recap, and we've covered quite a few topics. And so just kind of, again, just a general overview of what we've covered. And then if there are any other digital asks that you might have or training around that, please let us know. Again, we want to be responsive to folks as much as possible in terms of what your needs are around getting out the count in your community. But kind of the moral of this story is that even though we have these operational changes happening, again, it's really, really important to continue to remind our communities to self-respond to the census. We want to get the most accurate data that we possibly can, and we also want to make sure that all of our communities are represented in that final count. And so again, even though we're getting pushed back to Halloween, we want to continue this momentum around the census to get out the count. And I believe, thanks folks, it looks like we're having people kind of tune in terms of some conversation around folks and what their census needs are. I think what I might do in the interest of time is gather all of this information, and I'll do a little bit of a share out next week to kind of review the data and the responses we've been getting. But please continue to send those in. It's extremely helpful. And now I want to open it back up again for the last couple of minutes that we have on the call. If anyone does have any questions, comments, concerns about the census, I know we answered quite a few questions earlier, but if there are any remaining ones, now is the time to pop those in the chat box or in the Q&A box.
Hi, Katie, this is Lila. I just wanted to say really quickly, there were some questions about sort of some of the newer videos, and I just wanted to share that the Census Bureau has a YouTube channel. And so just search for the YouTube Census Bureau channel, and you will get a lot of the videos that they have there. And you'll see what the more recently posted ones are. I tried to put a link to one of them, and I got a bad link from my Facebook page, but they have a lot of really helpful, real quick to use and share on social media videos that I think some people might be looking for.
Thank you, Lila.
So there's, Katie, there's one question coming in. Well, let me back up. I think Katie Mitten had a question on when Dr. Valencia was covering Randall County on why they had such a good self-response rate. I very quickly looked at the map, and it looks like the majority are not in an update leave area, so that probably has to do something with it. But we can definitely, if anybody from who is in Randall County or leads efforts there is on the call and wants to kind of jump in, we'd be happy to hear. But we can also reach out to them as well as to kind of Fort Bend County to see what they're doing that's working so well. And then Daniel has a question. So October 31st is a done deal. Dr. Valencia, could you share again what you shared earlier on how the kind of the deadlines work?
Sure. So the operation deadlines are separate, right, from the congressional mandate or constitutional mandated dates. And so if the Census Bureau is asking for these operational deadlines to be extended, it probably has a lot to do with the fact that they are seeing, you know, our self-response rates not rising and not just ours here in Texas, but the nation as a whole, not rising at the level that they need to see them rise, and that they're still having to have some of these operations delayed, like, NRFU, the non-response follow-up and update leave because of the COVID situation. So if they are requesting that the constitutional deadlines be extended, it's most likely related to the fact that they may not feel they have sufficient time to be able to get the quality data that they need for a complete and accurate count. That's what we're aiming for, right, with the decennial census. And so they are asking for those deadlines to be moved. Now, Congress has to approve those because they're part of the US Constitution. And so that's what we're waiting to find out, is exactly what Congress will determine, and then what that means for some of these operational delays and the use of administrative data in place of actual counts in some areas. I hope that answers the question.
Right, and I think that the Census Bureau has to have time in order to do those calculations and to hand over that information. And so pushing against any existing deadline, again, as Dr. Valencia mentioned, means that we wouldn't get an accurate or fair count. And so the follow-up question, so then this still needs to be ratified by Congress. Dr. Valencia, do you want to?
Sure, yes, we still need congressional approval to move the constitutional deadlines, but the operational deadlines can be moved. Of course, the Census Bureau would then have to determine, what that means for the overall count.
Thank you, Dr. Valencia. So again, we know that these changes are a bit confusing and they may also have a lot of impact on our own operations in terms of what we were doing in our own census outreach. And so know that we're also trying to make sense of it and that we're trying to also change our own strategies and figure out how best we can support you all on this call. If you have other questions, again, you know where to reach us. And so with that, I think we could probably wrap up. Katie?
Yeah, well, thanks again, everyone, for joining us and being active participants in the poll. Again, we know that this information is confusing. We are in an ever-changing world and environment, just with the census and, of course, our daily lives as well. But please know we will continue sharing information with y'all. And I know that we had quite a couple of questions today that we couldn't give a definite answer for, so we'll be sure to follow up on those where we can. If you ever need to reach any of us, our emails are at the bottom. As always, this presentation has been recorded, so we'll be sure to send out the recording as well as the slides at the end. But would like to thank everyone again for joining us. We hope that you, your family and friends, loved ones are safe during this time. And thank you again for your commitment to getting out the count in Texas.
Thank you, Katie. And then I think Mariana had one, jumped in with one last question. So just to confirm, the October 31st deadline set, whether or not Congress approves the other deadlines. Yes, so again, the Bureau can create their own kind of operational timelines and change those. But again, those are we're looking at kind of two distinct things right now. So yes, going forward, we're still looking at that October 31st deadline as kind of our last day to self-respond and to get that field data collection.
Thanks, Genesis. And I believe that might be the end of the questions. But again, if anyone does have anything, please feel to follow up and we will see everyone again next week. Thanks so much. Stay safe.